Final Fantasy is a legendary and iconic game, and yet in the years since its original Japanese launch in 1987, there has never been a definitive release. Each version of the game is flawed in some way, and only two are worth playing today. The original North American NES release from 1990 is plagued with bugs and a shoddy translation due in no small part to Nintendo's strict censorship policies at the time and the general inefficiency of written English compared to Japanese. The PlayStation Remaster included in 2003's Final Fantasy Origins is an enhanced port of the Japan-exclusive WonderSwan Color remake, but has a much better translation closer to the original Japanese script, fully remastered CD quality audio, and several more quality of life improvements, while also keeping that NES difficulty curve, resulting in an excessive need for grinding. Truly, if that's your jam, the PS1 version is the way to go, and since the disc itself plays on 3 generations of PlayStation hardware, PS1, PS2, and PS3, and is available for download on PSN, making it compatible with the PlayStation Portable and Vita as well, it's easily one of the most readily available ways to play. However, just a year later came the Game Boy Advance port of Origins, Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls, with a reduced resolution, poor audio quality, the removal of many features and bonuses from the PlayStation version, and lowered difficulty. It's no wonder many fans warned others away from it. That said, it did try to make up for its shortcomings by including 4 brand new optional bonus dungeons. Then in 2007, just in time for the 20th anniversary of the original Japanese release, we got my favorite version of the game. Then exclusive to the PSP, but since ported to mobile, this version is a full remake of the GBA port, giving the game a fresh coat of paint, and restoring nearly every feature that had been missing from Dawn of Souls, while also adding in a 5th bonus dungeon. Sadly, as of late 2020, Final Fantasy remains one of only 2 mainline entries in its franchise to not get a port to PC. I'd also like to point out that nearly all game footage shown in this video is from the 20th Anniversary Edition, which has been upscaled to 3 times its original size because Sony, in their bright wisdom, used an odd duck resolution of 480 by 272 for their handheld. Math wizards will easily deduce that while the horizontal pixel count would allow for a perfect 4x integer scaling to 1080p, the vertical resolution is just 2 pixels too tall, meaning that same upscale would result in a cropped image, removing the top and bottom row of pixels. This isn't a sin against the game, it just means you get to look at this nice border overlay instead. Aside from using a character model based on Yoshitaka Amano's original concept art for the Warrior of Light and featuring a crystal, the opening FMV has absolutely nothing to do with Final Fantasy. I can't read Japanese, but the inclusion of not 1 but 2 Japanese language options is a definite win in my book. Final Fantasy begins by letting you select your party of 4 from a pool of 6 distinct classes, mixing and matching as you please. You can even have a full party of monks if you want to be totally overpowered, or run 4 white mages if you're a masochist. Each class has a specific role. The warrior is your tank and main melee fighter, the monk is a bare-knuckle DPS machine, the white and black mages are your support and offensive casters respectively, and the red mage is a jack of all trades, being a weaker version of the warrior that can also cast low-level white and black spells. The thief alone sucks since he's weaker than the warrior, and the monk can't use magic and can't even steal. His lone attribute is having a higher chance to escape combat. As such, I always replace him with a red mage to help balance out my party, so say hello to Candle the warrior, Jack the red mage, and his sister Jill the white mage. It's amazing to think that while every single class has since become a franchise mainstay, it's the Black Mage's design that has endured the longest, and his name is Carl. Speaking of franchise mainstays, who knew that so many of Nobuo Uematsu's original songs would continue to show up in Final Fantasy games to this day? Notable tracks that got their start in this very game include the Crystal Prelude, the Final Fantasy Overture, the Victory theme, and of course that epic bass line in the battle theme. The wind's die and the sea's rage are inherently contradictory lines. Wind is what causes waves to form, and storm winds are what make the sea rage. No wind means the surface of the ocean should be as flat as a mirror and the skies clear. Clear skies would also wreak havoc on the world's ecosystems, leading to a never-ending drought and the death of all vegetation. Keep this in mind for later, as we will come back to it. It's nice to see, however, that each reference to an element, wind, water, and earth, also shows the location of that crystal shrine. After the opening cutscene, Final Fantasy dumps the player into the overworld with little to no idea of where to go or what to do. After meeting the King of Cornelia, he tasks you with rescuing his daughter from the fallen knight who kidnapped her, despite knowing full well that the Warriors of Light have a much more important quest. It's hard to understate how important this game's battle mechanics were to the RPG genre. Final Fantasy was one of the first RPGs to show enemies as well as your party on screen at the same time, and even as far back as the NES Famicom versions, the battle presentation was incredibly dynamic. But those versions had a weird quirk where having the whole party focus on one enemy was a bad idea. If one character killed an enemy while another was already queued up to attack it, that second character's turn would be wasted. This had the advantage of making every fight a real challenge where you had to carefully strategize, but at the cost of being really frustrating when most fights are random encounters. Thankfully, every version from the PlayStation onwards includes redirected attacks so that any character whose original target was destroyed attacks a random enemy instead. But now the trade-off is that normal fights become a slog where you just press X to win. Honestly, I've never minded this since I'm more of a story guy anyway. As far as first dungeons go, the Temple of Chaos is incredibly simple. There are a couple rooms with loot off to the side, but the boss is a straight shot north. Despite being an expert swordsman with no match in all of Cornelia, Garland is a total pushover. More so if you've spent any time grinding. No forced backtracking is always a win. Sarah entrusts the warriors with a loot that has been handed down for generations, believing it may come in handy. This loot is only ever used once to gain access to the game's final dungeon. As a reward for rescuing Sarah, the king has the bridge to the north rebuilt. This bridge is the only means of traversing beyond Cornelia and has lain in ruin for quite a while, meaning his kingdom has been cut off from the rest of the world for who knows how long. Yes, there is a port directly south of Cornelia, but remember that the seas rage, meaning that ocean travel should be all but impossible. The epicness of this scene perfectly bookends the game's prologue. That said, this text scrolls far too slowly. Visiting Matoya's cave before defeating Astos is entirely optional, but does give some added context considering the King of Cornelia had mentioned a crystal to the north, likely referencing Matoya's stolen eye. Matoya's brooms are incredibly helpful by teaching you how to open the world map from the overworld, a handy tool in case you ever get lost. East of Pravoka is a bit of land that takes advantage of a weird quirk in Final Fantasy's combat encounter system, peaking just far enough north to generate battles meant for much later in the game, making it prime real estate for early grinding with a few well-placed Fyra spells. After the warriors trounce his pirate crew, Bike hands over his ship, his sole source of income, without a fuss. Considering its sprite is clearly drawn with full rigging, this ship should not be able to sail. Remember, there is no wind to power it, to say nothing of the supposedly raging seas. Come to think of it, who exactly is crewing the ship anyways? I doubt the Warriors of Light would know how, and there's only the 4 of them. Bike's crew numbered at least 9. The lone elven town in the game is appropriately named Elfheim, but hey, at least it's better than the original translation of Elfland. Elfheim has no king and is instead ruled by a prince. Said prince has been in a coma for 5 years, which leads me to wonder about the state of the elven government, since no one seems to be in charge and yet there is no discernible chaos. Like with Matoya's cave, visiting the Western Keep before the Marsh Cave is entirely optional, but gives added context. Final Fantasy's magic system was originally ripped directly from the pages of a D&D player's manual, with spells organized in levels according to power, and each level having a set number of charges that could only be refilled with the dawn of a new day. The problem with having a magic system like this in a video game with no day-night cycle, however, is that magic is only refilled after stopping at an inn or using specific items like tents and cottages. Thankfully, starting with Dawn of Souls, the magic charges have been replaced by a standard MP-based system, meaning mages are useful in more than just boss fights, though spells are still organized in specific levels. The Marsh Cave is Final Fantasy's first true dungeon, and as such proves a decent challenge to new players with its branching paths right at the start, copious amounts of loot, and the stronger monsters on the lower levels. It also introduces the concept of duplicate chests, wherein multiple chests can hold the same item, and opening one opens all those linked to it. As well as encounter points, specific fights triggered by stepping on certain tiles that can then be played over and over again. Final Fantasy loves trapping chests this way. Astute players may have already figured it out, but the king in the Western Keep being Astos is a neat twist and foreshadows that events aren't always as they seem. With his ability to cast Death, insta-killing one of your party members, Astos makes for a far better first boss than Garland ever did. Killing Astos starts a quest chain that is little more than one fetch quest after another, backtracking all the way, as returning Matoya's Eye will net you the Jolt Tonic, which wakes the Elven Prince, who then gives you the Mystic Key in return, which you need to open the treasure vault in Castle Cornelia to get the Nitro Powder, to then give to Narek so he can blow open the canal, finally allowing you to sail out into the rest of the world. It should also be said, though, that the Mystic Key does open more doors than just in Castle Cornelia, giving the player access to powerful weapons and items in the Elven Castle, the Western Keep, the Marsh Cave, the Chaos Shrine, and Mount Duergar, even if you do have to backtrack to get it all. Also, Matoya is a dick to the player. Dwarves are Scottish cliché. The Dwarven blacksmith is named Smith. Narek uses the Nitro Powder in a dead-end tunnel with little regard for possible cave-ins or flooding of his home. Melmond was recently attacked by a vampire, so it stands to reason that the town's sanctuary now lies in ruin. Speaking of the vampire, he serves as a wonderful fake-out with regards to the great evil that is corrupting the Earth Crystal. That said, you will be forced to backtrack out of the dungeon after beating him, since you need the Earth Rod to break the stone slab sealing off the rest of the cavern. And if you think, oh, I'll just go get that first, then, well, sorry to disappoint, but you need the Star Ruby to get it, and that particular item lies in the chest directly behind the vampire. The Lich, first of the elemental fiends, is a master of the undead and is appropriately weak to fire and holy magic. And look at that sprite work. Amino really is a talented artist, and Square has always done a great job bringing his designs to life. Just the sheer size of the Lich in comparison to ordinary monsters really shows off his importance. I've always been under the impression that the crystals carried by the Warriors of Light are just shards, which are then used to rekindle the light of the main crystals themselves, but as they are never actually referred to as shards, it's never made exactly clear what the difference is. Not to mention, it takes roughly a quarter of the game's runtime before you reach the first crystal. Like many 8 and 16-bit JRPGs, Final Fantasy's 2D map wraps both horizontally and vertically. While this does make navigation a cinch, it calls into question the physics of this world, since a spherical planet would then be impossible. The town of Crescent Lake is appropriately named. Only upon reaching the Circle of Sages is the player finally given some much-needed exposition. According to the sages, the Wind Fiend appeared 400 years ago and the Water Fiend 200. Assuming that corruption of a crystal coincides with the arrival of a fiend, something that seems likely given the recent events at Melmond, the wind stopped and the seas began to rage centuries ago. With the ensuing breakdown of the water cycle, life on this world anywhere other than near the Earth Crystal should be impossible. And here we have yet more contradictory information. If the Wind and Water Fiends appeared, then why is it different for the Fire Fiend, who has now awoken 200 years ahead of schedule? This is another one we'll come back to later. Upon receiving the canoe, you can finally sequence break the game, restoring the 3 remaining crystals in any order you wish. Lava, or magma I guess since we're underground, only hurts you when you move. Merilith speaks in the third person. The Fiend of Fire, despite living in a volcano where most monsters are weak to ice magic, is not herself weak to ice magic. I'm going to assume this is because she woke up 2 centuries early and would have developed that allergy in time just like the other fiends. And yes, I'd hit that. After defeating Merilith and restoring the Fire Crystal, you'd be forgiven for not knowing what to do next. While you could potentially stumble across the Ice Cavern on your own, or by talking to every NPC you encounter, I have never once come across anything in the game that will point you in the direction of the specific piece of unmarked desert you need to go to in order to get the airship. Especially since you need the Leva Stone for the airship to appear in the first place, and you need the airship in order to explore the northern continents. Seriously, how are you supposed to figure this out without a guide? Despite initially taking off from the desert, the airship cannot land on desert tiles. In fact, the airship can only land on plains tiles, meaning that most landing sites going forward are still a decent walk away from key locations. Bahamut, King of the Dragons, makes his first appearance, and tasks the Warriors of Light with proving their courage. And what proof does he require? Why, a rat's tail, of course. But by delivering the tail to Bahamut, he rewards the warriors by upgrading their classes. Not only is each new class more powerful than the old ones, but the wizards all have expanded spellbooks, and the knight and ninja can use low-level white and black magic respectively, meaning the thief class is finally worth it. But then we're back in fetch quest territory, as entering the Sunken Shrine, home of the water crystal, is only possible with an item called Oxyale, which lets you breathe underwater and is received for freeing the fairy who lives in the town of Gaia. And where is the fairy? Another bit of unmarked desert. Though this time the game is kind enough to have NPCs who will lead you to it. The Sunken Shrine is a two-part dungeon where you start in the middle. The water crystal lies at the bottom, but the Rosetta Stone, a key item necessary to gain access to the next dungeon, lies at the top. Sure, the Kraken is no Ultros, but who said Final Fantasy's obsession with octopus villains began with the 6th game? Dr. Un uses the Rosetta Stone to teach the Warriors of Light how to speak Lufenian, never mind that learning to read an ancient language is completely different from learning to speak it. While he does not appear in the game, Cid is at least referenced as the creator of the airship, and yes, I am aware this was retconned in for the remakes and remasters. While the Mirage Tower is a short dungeon, it leads directly into the next one, so be sure to come prepared. Mechanical enemies like the Guardians and robot NPCs prove that science fiction has been a part of the Final Fantasy formula from the beginning. If you haven't already retrieved the Warp Cube from the Waterfall Cave, you will need to do so now, otherwise you can't get into the Flying Fortress. What you see before you is described as an observation window, which would only be correct if Final Fantasy's world was flat and the Flying Fortress hovered high above the Chaos Shrine. Both of these are impossible, as we've already established that the world is a donut, and the energy from the Wind Crystal comes from the location of the Mirage Tower, which then makes it safe to assume the Flying Fortress, home of the Wind Crystal, is directly overhead. What then is the solution? Why, the window is a computer screen, of course. Also, X marks the spot. Tiamat, the Fiend of Wind, uses ice and fire-based attacks. With all 4 fiends defeated and the crystals restored, there's only one thing left to do. Waste time in the game's optional dungeons, of course. In all seriousness though, the optional dungeons are largely that, a waste of time. While the bosses prove a good challenge, the maps are randomized, the loot is mostly useless at this stage, and the regular monsters offer a pittance in gil and experience. Not to mention they have zero bearing on the game's story, and you can't even challenge all the bosses in each dungeon in a single run for most of them. Which means it's time for the game's final dungeon, the Chaos Shrine. How cool is it that the place where the game began is where it all ends? It's like a loop or something. And by the way, is anyone else bothered by the crystals in the menu not being in the same order they were restored? While it's never explicitly stated, the so-called Black Crystal is just as important as the other 4. It is, after all, the crystal that governs time itself. By stepping back in time 2,000 years, we can finally see what the Chaos Shrine looked like in its heyday. Though we sadly can't go out and explore the world at large. Sarah's loot finally gets used. You are forced to fight each of the elemental fiends again in turn, and while yes, this is just a boss rush segment, it should be noted that each fiend is stronger than when you last fought them, and most are lacking elemental weaknesses. Besides, the issue of them being here is far, far worse. Fighting all the way to the end of the Chaos Shrine reveals Garland. Yes, remember him? The pushover knight from the very beginning of the game? Turns out he was the big bad all along. The fiends saved Garland's life by sending him back in time so he could become the embodiment of chaos and send them forward so they could then send him back, creating a time loop that would let chaos reign forever. There's just one problem. Garland claims to have already sent the fiends into the future, but the Warriors of Light had to fight them in order to reach him. See the problem yet? No? Okay, then how about this? If Garland's planned loop is dependent on sending the fiends into the future, presumably to the points where they appeared and started wreaking havoc, then how exactly can that happen if we've already defeated them here in the past? Garland's plan was doomed to fail, is what I'm saying. What's frustrating, though, is that the developers didn't seem to understand this and tried to make it look as if the time loop had already occurred, even going so far as having the ending text crawl talk about the warriors having broken the loop, when what's really happening is just a linear chain of events occurring in a non-chronological order. Ironic then that a broken time travel plot would come out of the same studio that would go on to create one of the best time travel narratives in gaming history less than a decade later, but hey, we're not sending Chrono Trigger today. And if everything I said earlier leaves you wondering how the fiends ended up in the future after all, well, they just took the long way around. After being beaten in the Chaos Shrine, they each slunk off to their appropriate crystals, whereupon they would slumber and slowly regain their power, awakening when the time was right. Also, once again, this text scrolls way too slowly. Not once during the credits does the name Hironobu Sakaguchi ever appear. Not as original staff, not as a special thanks, nothing. And that's just cold considering the man led the team that created the game back in 1987 and was heavily involved in almost every single Final Fantasy project up through FF12. So now we come to the end of the game and I'm left with a few thoughts. Final Fantasy is not an easy game to love in 2020. Depending on which version you play, you'll either have a bone-crushing grind or a too easy time of it. The story is largely lackluster and generic, not to mention the broken world building and ending, and the battle mechanics are basic and serviceable at best. That said, its legacy and impact cannot be understated. Before Final Fantasy debuted in 1987, the RPG genre as a whole didn't really exist. Sure, there was Dragon Quest and Ultima before it, but I think it was Final Fantasy that really set the standard, especially for JRPGs. Not to mention, without this first game, we would have never gotten the rest of a franchise, and Sakaguchi would have left game development entirely. That means no Final Fantasy 6, 7, or even 16. No Chrono Trigger, no Kingdom Hearts, no Lost Odyssey, and yeah, we wouldn't have gotten the Spirits Within either, but that's a small price to pay, I think. And I almost forgot to mention how well designed the Overworld was. I mean, yeah, it gets 0 points for geographical realism, but its design is more about shepherding the player through the story in an era where most games were all about walking right and stories were relegated to a paragraph in the manual. With more and more of the world opening up as players become more and more experienced, you start locked in a small area until you reach the first story milestone and the king repairs the bridge. Then you have a larger area to explore, but only 2 new places to go, one of which is optional. After getting the ship, it opens more as you run around the Aldean Sea, defeating Astos and acquiring the items you need to blow open Nerek's Canal. At that point, you seemingly have the whole world at your beck and call, but the ship only docks at ports, so it's not until you defeat the Lich and get the canoe from Crescent Lake that it opens further. Only when you have the airship can you finally explore the whole world. And while yes, there are some aspects of story and world progression that could have been handled better, I'm looking at you, airship in an unmarked desert, I still think it largely gets things right. So whether you're new to Final Fantasy or a longtime fan, I'd still recommend giving it a go, just not the NES or GBA versions. Stick to PlayStation, PSP, or even mobile if you have to. Bonus round. Chaos reigns.